Thank you for being here this evening, folks. There's a lot of places you could be on a Wednesday night, like home, but you've chosen to be here, and I'm very thankful for that. And we're going to do our best to make it worth your while. And that means I'm going to do my best to get right into the teaching right away. So you all set? Let's go. A construction crew was working in downtown Vancouver in a high-rise building, and they discovered some copper wire about 150 feet below the ground. So local archaeologists claim that this proves that Vancouver was far ahead of the rest of the nation, and we had the very first ancient phone network. Well, not to be outdone, the city of Toronto, a week later, they were digging downtown there, and they found fragments of glass fiber about 200 feet below the ground. So the Torontonians claim this proves that archaeologists claimed in Ontario that this proved that Toronto had the very first fiber optic network. Well, not to be outdone, about a week later in St. John's, Newfoundland, they were digging. And they dug down 300 feet and they found absolutely nothing. And so they claim this proves that the Newfoundlanders were the first to have a wireless network. Do Christians make the same wild assertions? Do we claim that God exists based on no evidence whatsoever? In 1962, German Titov, the Soviet cosmonaut and the second man in space, he stood before a nest of microphones when he returned to Earth, and he was asked what he saw when he was up in space. And he said, "I saw no God nor angels while in orbit." Everybody laughed. If we can't see him with our eyes, how can we know that there is a God? I mean, what evidence can we point to? Bertrand Russell, the famous atheist, was once asked what he would do if he were to die and find out he was wrong. What would he say to God? And Bertrand Russell replied and said, "I would tell God that he did not give me enough evidence." So was Russell right? Is there a lack of evidence for the existence of God? 2,000 years ago, a very highly educated and influential man named Paul, he addressed this subject in a letter he wrote to a series of Christ followers, a group of Christ followers in ancient Rome. Listen carefully to what Paul wrote. He said this: "Since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, like his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men and women are without excuse." So Paul is saying that there is enough evidence before our eyes to grasp the truth that we are not alone in the universe, that someone is behind all of this. So in other words, as your outline says, you need to do nothing more than look around you. We're looking for evidence for the existence of God. Look around you, first of all, as your outline says. Have you considered, letter A, the existence of the universe? Look around you. For example, the existence of the universe. Have you ever wondered where everything came from? I mean, look at this podium here on the platform. Now, where did this podium come from? I just came out from my office, and here, this podium was right here. So what are the options? Where did this podium come from? Well, I got three options. It has always existed. This is an eternal podium. That's option number one. There's another option, if we brainstorm. It created itself out of nothing. And it suddenly appeared in a vast explosion of nothingness. Poof, this podium appeared. Or thirdly, it had a creator. Someone brought it into existence. Which of those three options seems the most likely, the most plausible to you? It's always existed. It's an eternal podium. It created itself out of nothing. Or it had a creator. It was brought into existence. What's true of this podium is equally true of our universe. What are the possible explanations for the existence of our universe? Well, as far as our best thinkers are concerned, there are only two possible explanations. One of these explanations has to be true. The universe is either eternal or the universe had a beginning. It's either always existed or it had a beginning. Now, for centuries, atheists proposed the first option, that the universe was eternal, that it had always existed. Again, Bertrand Russell made a famous claim that the universe, and I quote him, he said, "It's just there, and that's all." He considered the universe to be a brute fact. It's just there, that's all. That long represented the atheist position. However, In 1929, astronomer Edwin Hubble made a discovery that rocked the scientific world. Through his observations of distant space, Hubble was able to prove that the galaxies in our universe were moving away from us. Hubble had visual and measurable evidence that our universe is expanding. And that fact led to an undeniable reality. If our universe is expanding, that means, as your outline says, the universe had a beginning. If the universe is expanding, that means the universe had a beginning. It led to what is today known as the Big Bang cosmology. They estimate roughly 13.8 billion years ago, this universe began. Now, if the universe had a beginning, where did it come from? There are only two possible options. As your outline says, the universe either brought itself into existence or it had a creator. The universe has a beginning. It either brought itself into existence or it has a creator. Now, which option makes more sense to you? Could the universe have brought itself into existence? Could the universe have caused itself to exist? Now, how could something cause itself to exist? It's actually an irrational concept when you think about it. In order to cause yourself to exist, you have to exist before you exist in order to bring yourself into existence. Essentially, when you get right down to it, the foundation of atheism is this: on its own, out of nothing came everything. On its own, out of nothing came everything. I suggest to you this evening, as your outline says, the most plausible alternative is that our universe was created by an incredibly powerful outside agent. Our universe was created by an incredibly powerful outside agent, meaning an agent that exists outside of space and time, matter and energy. Now, this often leads to the question, the age-old question that every child had asked their parent: where did God come from then? The child asks, where did I come from? Oh, your mother and father. And where did you come from? Our mother and father. Where did they come? Their mother and father. And it goes back and back and back. And where did they first humans come from? From God. And where did God come from? Well, the answer is simple. No one made God. God has always existed. God is an eternal being. And by the way, that's not special pleading on the part of the theist. For centuries, atheists asserted that the universe was eternal. Well, if God can be eternal, then why can't the universe be eternal? Because as Edwin Hubble demonstrated, we have strong and convincing evidence that the universe had a beginning. The most plausible explanation for the existence of our universe is an eternal being that is powerful enough to create and sustain the universe. A being that is eternal and uncaused, outside of space and time, because it created space and time, so it has to be outside space and time. Immensely powerful and incredibly intelligent. And centuries ago, that is exactly how God revealed himself. The author of the biblical book of Genesis, the very first book in the Bible, says the man named Abraham, and I quote, called upon the name of the Lord, the eternal God. Centuries later, a man named Moses was commissioned by God to lead Israel out of the nation of Egypt. And during the job interview process, Moses asked God a simple question. I'm quoting the Bible. Suppose I go to the Israelites, God, and I say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, oh yeah, well, what's his name? What shall I tell them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to tell the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. God says, call me I am. Literally, I exist. That's my name. I am. I exist. According to the biblical authors, there is enough evidence before our eyes to grasp the truth that we are not alone in this universe, that there's someone behind it all. You need to do nothing more than look around you. As we've just seen, the very existence of our universe stands as a powerful evidence for the existence of God. But the universe isn't done talking. The universe has even more testimony to give. You see, not only does the mere existence of our universe speak to the existence of God, but I'd also propose, letter B in your outline, the complex fine-tuning of the universe also points towards the existence of God. The complex fine-tuning of the universe. Imagine with me that you're walking barefoot through a field of grass with a friend, tall grass, and you suddenly stub your toe up against something. You look down and you stub your toe against a boulder on the ground, and your friend asks you what you think or where you think that boulder came from. You might answer by possibly saying, for all you know, that stone has been there since the beginning of time. Some volcano spewed it out or some glacier dropped it off. It would be difficult to argue with you. That's not a crazy premise. Now, suppose you're walking a little further on your journey. A few paces later, your toe stumps itself again on another object. But this time when you look down, you see an iPhone. Your same friend asks you the same question. How do you think that iPhone got there? Now, I would highly doubt that you would give the same answer for the iPhone as you gave for the boulder. Why? Why is that true? The reason is simple. Unlike the boulder, the iPhone has obviously been assembled with a purpose. It has mechanisms that are finely tuned. It bears the distinctive marks of a designer. Step out of the field and walk with me into a cave somewhere in the continent of Africa. An archaeologist has stumbled upon a simple etching on a wall. It's faded, it's barely legible, but the lines clearly depict the stick figure of some ancient antelope. The archaeologist, without hesitation, points to that drawing as proof of some ancient, reasonably intelligent ancestor who put it there. Now, no one argues. Clear drawings of animals don't just appear out of nowhere. Travel with me now to the darkened theater where they're showing a rerun of Contact, the film based upon a book by the famous atheist Carl Sagan. In the movie, scientists are scanning the skies for signs of intelligent life in space. For years, their radio telescopes receive only random static. Then, one day, they begin receiving transmissions of prime numbers. Those are numbers that can only be divided by themselves and the number 1. The scientists reason properly, I believe, that it's too improbable that there would be a natural cause behind a string of numbers like that. This wasn't just static, this was information. And from that, they conclude that there is an intelligence out there. As the famous atheist Carl Sagan himself once said, and I quote him, "The receipt of a single message from space would be enough evidence to know that there is intelligent life out there." Now, where are we going with all this? What do iPhones in fields, etchings in caves, and prime numbers from space have to do with evidence for the existence of God? Reason with me. If simple prime numbers communicate the existence of an intelligent designer, what does something as complex as DNA communicate? Every single cell in the human body contains more information than every volume of the Encyclopedia Britannica combined. Just one single cell. What does that tell us? If the existence of a stick drawing of an antelope is enough evidence to surmise an intelligent designer, what does the existence of the actual living, breathing, reproducing, three-dimensional antelope tell us? As your outline says, the universe, our universe, bears undeniable evidence of design. Our universe bears undeniable evidence of design. Now, to illustrate just how powerful this evidence is, I want to throw a couple of huge numbers at you here. The age, we said, the universe is estimated to be about 13.8 billion, give or take a few billion years old, okay? Now, 13.8 billion years old, that's how old the universe is. In seconds, that means the universe has 10 to the 17th power seconds. So since the beginning of the universe, 10 to the 17th power seconds. That's a huge number, right? 13.8 billion years, roughly 10 to 17 power seconds. The number of cells in the human body is 10 to the 14th power. That's cells in your body. 10 to the 14th power. Again, huge numbers. The number of subatomic particles in the whole universe. Subatomic particles in the whole universe, 10 to the 80th power. Subatomic particles in the whole universe. So you can see these are massive numbers, okay? With those in the back of your mind, think about this. One person observed that our universe, you and I live on a knife edge of existence. There are constants and quantities that had to be embedded in our universe from the very moment of the Big Bang. From that very moment of creation, the beginning of space, matter, and time, there's a set of constants and quantities that had to be embedded from the very beginning. Let me just touch on three of them. There is what's called the gravitational constant. This is if the gravitational constant wasn't exactly as it is, our universe would not have been able to form because the planets and the stars wouldn't have formed. And then there's what's known as the weak force. The weak force, is what creates in the nucleus of atoms is the weak force. It operates in the nucleus of atoms. Without it, intelligent life wouldn't exist because chemistry wouldn't exist. And then thirdly, there's what's known as the cosmological constant. This is the constant that enables our universe to expand. Now, those are just three of others, but those three constants and quantities had to be embedded from the very beginning of our universe. But here's the thing. Think of those constants as dials on a dashboard. So, you have you be quiet. Didn't you listen to Lewis's announcement? So think of these as knobs or dials like on like on an amplifier or something, okay? You turn these dials, and there's notches on them, right? There's notches all around these dials. Here's the thing. If the gravitational constant was altered by so think of they had 10 to the 60th power notches. Remember, the number of subatomic particles in the whole universe is 10 to the 80th, we said here. If this dial has 10 to the 60th power notches, and you just turned it by one notch, no universe. When it comes to the weak force, it had 10 to the 100th power notches. And if you turn that dial just by 10 to the 100th, just one notch of that 10 to the 100th power, no universe. The cosmological constant, 10 to the 120th power. That's how many notches, little dots there were on that dial. And if you turn that dial with 10 to the 120th power notches by just one notch, no universe. This universe was incredibly finely tuned for intelligent life. It's undeniable. This isn't debated. This isn't denied. These are facts. Sir Roger Penrose, a mathematician, mathematical physicist, Nobel laureate in physics, claims that in order to produce the universe that even roughly looks like ours, the initial conditions must have been finely tuned with a precision. Now here's the number he said, 1 to the 10th to the 123rd power. I just can't even fathom that number. He says that is how finely tuned this universe is. Argues the largest number you can imagine, perhaps. Anthony Flew was perhaps the most famous atheist in the late 20th century, early 21st century. He was one of the signatories of the Humanist Manifesto. He was the author of famous atheist books known as God and Philosophy, The Presumption of Atheism, Atheistic Humanism. He was a fellow of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, and he was the champion of skeptics, atheists, unbelievers for decades. If you needed an atheist to debate, you went to Anthony Flew. However, late in his life, Anthony Flew departed from atheism. Late in his life, Anthony Flew declared that he was no longer an atheist. Why? What changed the mind of this legendary atheist? I quote him. He says, "It now seems to me that the finding of more than 50 years of DNA research have provided materials for a new and enormously powerful argument to design. I simply must follow where the evidence leads." He wrote this book. It said, "There is no God," and then "no" is scribbled out, and there's "a." There is a God. How the world's most notorious atheist changed his mind. Well, Anthony Flew said, "I just have to follow where the evidence leads. I can't deny it." Well, how do other atheists respond to this incredibly powerful design evidence? Remember Richard Dawkins in his book, bestseller, The God Delusion? In this book, Dawkins sums up the state of the art, if you will, when it comes to atheism's response to the complex fine-tuning of our universe. Dawkins proposes that our universe isn't the only universe out there. Dawkins proposes that there are an infinite number of universes out there. There are billions and trillions and gazillions of universes out there, and every conceivable type of universes out there. And by chance, by pure luck, you and I just happen to be in one that randomly produced life. So what evidence is there for this multiverse, as it's known, this infinite number of universes, the world ensemble? What evidence is there? None. There's no evidence. There's not a single shred of evidence of there being one other universe out there. Now think about that. In order to explain the complexity and fine-tuning of the only known universe, the atheist is forced to appeal to universes that, as far as the evidence shows, don't even exist. The question that we're doing our best to answer this evening is this: is there evidence for the existence of God? It's been proposed that there is enough evidence before our eyes to grasp the truth that we're not alone in the universe, that there's someone out there behind all this, and that you need to do nothing more than look around you. Look at the very existence of our universe. It testifies to the existence of God. Look at the complex fine-tuning of our universe. It testifies to the existence of God. But there's more. Not only can you look around you, but as your outline says, number 2, you can look within you. Look within you to see evidence of God's existence. Now, what evidence do we see when we look within ourselves? Well, letter A. When we look within, we see the existence of objective moral values and duties. Objective moral values and duties. What do we mean by that? For years, our newscasts were filled with the name Robert Pickton and the gruesome discoveries investigators found on his pig farm in Port Coquitlam. Pickton tortured, murdered, and dismembered women. And he did it all for his own pleasure. Now, I ask you a simple question. Do you think that what Robert Pickton did was wrong? Now, I want you to be very careful how you answer this question, because your response has serious implications. I'm not asking if you think what he did was distasteful. I'm not asking if you think it was unfortunate or unkind or inappropriate or socially destructive. I'm not asking that. I am asking if you believe that his actions were objectively wrong. In other words, do you believe that even if there were no laws forbidding Robert Pickton from kidnapping, torturing, murdering, and dismembering women, he would still have been wrong for doing what he did? If you answer yes, what he did was wrong, no matter what the law permits, then you are agreeing with what, for most people, is a self-evident truth. The truth that objective moral values and duties exist. You believe that there are activities like torturing a baby for fun that can never be labeled as acceptable by any culture at any time for any reason. You believe that there are things that are objectively wrong. Yes, you could even call them evil. We know this to be true, like we know 2 + 2 = 4 is true. It's that basic. In fact, it's so basic that some of you are wondering where I'm even going with this line of thinking. Here's the thing, as your outline says. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. If God does not exist, right and wrong are just illusions. If God does not exist, right and wrong are rules that we've simply made up out of thin air. Like children in the backyard playing a game and making up rules, our moral code is no different than kids making up rules in the backyard. They could be changed if you wanted to. If there's no God, you and I are nothing more than cosmic slime, and it's every slime ball for themselves. If there is no God, we have no ultimate reason to keep Robert Pickton locked up, because all he did was something that brought him pleasure. We could just as well lock up people who like mushrooms. Oh, but he hurt other people, you protest, and you say, we're protecting society. Okay, that's fine, but don't you dare call him a monster. And don't you dare look down on him, and don't you dare call him evil or wrong. Because if there is no God, the words evil and wrong have lost their meaning. Now, don't misunderstand me. I want to be very clear what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. I am not saying that you have to believe in God in order to live a moral life. Absolutely not. I'm not saying that. Many, perhaps even most atheists, are striving to be upstanding moral people. The issue is not, can a person seek to live a moral life apart from God? The issue is, do objective moral values and duties actually exist apart from God? And the answer would have to be no. Apart from the existence of God, there is no rational, objective basis for morality. And it may surprise some of you that on this point, most atheists agree. Again, quoting Richard Dawkins, his atheist description of reality, I quote Dawkins here. There is no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. Dawkins writes, it's pretty hard to defend absolutist morals on grounds other than religious ones. He's agreeing with what I'm saying here, folks. Dawkins is simply facing the facts of his atheist belief. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. But as your outline says, here's the issue though. But objective moral values do exist. They do exist. And deep down, we all know it. Deep down, we know that actions like rape, intolerance, child abuse are moral crimes. You know it, and I know it. And this knowing is God's stamp upon every one of us. The biblical author put it this way, I quote, God's law is not something alien, imposed on us from without, but it's woven into the very fabric of our creation. There's something deep within us that echoes God's yes and no, God's right and wrong. So the question we're addressing today is this. Is there evidence for the existence of God? We said, hey, yeah, look around you. The existence of the universe testifies to the existence of God. The complex fine-tuning of the universe testifies to the existence of God. Look within you, we said. The existence of objective moral values and duties testifies to the existence of God. Now, someone out there, and you might be thinking to yourself, okay, well, Darren, if this God exists, then why is he so distant? Why is he hiding? Why doesn't he show himself to us? Well, first of all, I would argue that creating the cosmos, embedding it with layers of complexity from the visual to the subatomic level, then stamping every human heart with the identical moral intuition is not hiding. Nonetheless, I understand the question. And that brings us to the final evidence we're going to just very briefly touch on tonight for the existence of God. There's evidence if you look around you, there's evidence if you look within you, and as your outline says, there's evidence if you look behind you. Look behind you. Now, what are we talking about here? We are talking about recorded history. We're talking about taking the time to study the historical facts surrounding the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. I believe that's on your outline, I'm not sure. The life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Resurrection meaning Jesus rose from the dead. And there are historical facts that every seeker, sincere seeker, must account for in these areas. See, historians reached a consensus long ago regarding the existence of Jesus. If you follow some internet infidel who tries to tell you that there's no evidence that Jesus ever existed, they are completely out of touch with reality. It's undeniable that this incredible man lived and died in first century Israel. That's not debated in intellectual circles. It's a matter of historical record. What surprises many people, however, is that the resurrection of Jesus is equally a matter of historical record. There are essentially 4 established facts recognized by virtually all New Testament critics, scholars, and historians today. And these facts themselves are not in dispute by the vast majority of them. And I'm talking Christian, agnostic, atheist scholars. And we're going to interact with those facts next week. We're going to investigate them, along with 2,000 years worth of skeptical responses to these facts. That's next week, when we look at the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. So, is there evidence for the existence of God? Absolutely. The truth is out there. All you need to do is look around you at the existence of the universe and the fine-tuning of the universe. Look within you at the existence of objective moral values and duties, and look behind you at the historical evidence for the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Folks, it takes more effort to ignore evidence for God's existence than it does to find evidence for God's existence. Now, are we talking about absolute certainty? No, I'm not. I'm not sure we can have absolute certainty about many things in life. How can you be absolutely certain that you exist right now? I mean, you can, I think, therefore I am, but how do you know that this room actually exists? How do you know that you're not a brain in a vat being stimulated by a scientist? How do you know that your thoughts of what you did today were just embedded in your mind 2 seconds ago? You don't know absolute certainty. Now, you have every reason to believe what you're experiencing is true, but do you have absolute 100% certainty? Oh, I don't know. I could make you doubt. But here's the thing. Absolute certainty is not required. All that is required for you to be rational is for your belief to be plausible, as plausible or more plausible than its alternatives. So what about you? What do you believe when it comes to the existence of God? Where do you believe the evidence leads? And why do you believe what you believe? I want you to spend the next few moments around your table discussing some questions, and then we are going to open it up for questions from the floor. I'll answer anything you have to ask. Let's take a few moments and discuss things around your table right now. Great question. So let's clarify. There's a difference between moral epistemology and moral ontology. Moral epistemology is how we come to know what's right and wrong. And that's where cultures are different. In one culture, something might be acceptable that's not acceptable in another. And we come to knowledge of this moral intuition in different ways. And different cultures are stronger than others. Different individuals have a stronger sense of right and wrong than others. So we're not talking tonight about moral epistemology, how we come to know what's right and wrong. What we're talking about tonight as evidence for the existence of God is moral ontology, the sense that there is objective right and wrong. Whether we always recognize it or every culture or individual is identical in recognizing it, that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is if there is no God, there is no right, there is no wrong, there is no good, there is no evil. There is no such thing as murder. Think of this. A lion doesn't murder a zebra. A lion kills a zebra. Okay? So there's no morality in the animal kingdom. If there is no God, We are no different than lions or mosquitoes. And so there's no such thing as murder. We just make up rules. But if there is a God who determines what is right and wrong by his own nature, he doesn't just make up rules. It goes God's nature, and from his nature he produces commands, and from his commands we have obligations, our moral obligations. And so, God just doesn't make up commands. Oh, today murder is going to be wrong, but I could change my mind tomorrow. No, it's based on God's holy nature. And out of his holy nature flow commands, and those commands turn into moral obligations for us. So what we're talking about is the grounding, the rooting of all morality comes from God. And if there is no God, there's no such thing as good and evil. And what Robert Pickton did wasn't evil. It just was. But we know it was evil. And that knowing that every human being has of right and wrong, though our epistemology of it may be clouded, deep down there are things that we know are ultimately wrong, right or wrong. And that's ontology, and that's what we're talking about tonight. It's the moral ontology, the foundation of morality, that is evidence for the existence of God. If there is no God, there is no such thing as evil, there's no such thing as good. Things just are. And we just make up rules. And our rule against torturing babies would be like, some other country could have a rule where it's good. We reward torturing babies. And they're just different from us. Just like on England, you drive on the left side. In North America, you drive on the right side. One country, torturing babies is wrong. Another country, torturing babies is right. Neither is better than the other. They're just different. If there is no God, morality would be like that. It's like driving on the right, driving on the left. No ultimate right or wrong. But we know there is ultimate right or wrong, and that is evidence of the existence of God. Thank you for that question. But the bottom line, if God created a perfect creation, and I'm going to be speaking on this on Sundays, not starting this Sunday, but the 2 Sundays after that, a series we're talking about calling The Big Picture, where we're going to get the big picture of history and reality and the universe and going through the Bible and how all of these questions are answered. But in a nutshell, yes, God did create a perfect world, but he's given us a free choice because the love requires a free choice. And I unpack that in a couple of weeks, in 2 or 3 weeks, I think. And so that's where evil comes from. Evil comes from our ability to choose. Why did God give us the ability to choose? I'm going to answer that in a couple of weeks. And why do we have to go through the middle? Because it's going through the middle that transforms us. And it's going through the middle where our free choices are expressed. And we are free creatures. We're not robots. And so we have to make our choices. And we're not accountable for someone else's sin. It's by our own sin, for our own sin for which we're accountable, not for Adam and Eve's sin. Well, God's goal for humanity is not for us to believe in him. God's goal for humanity is us to have a loving relationship with him. Believing in him is not the be-all and end-all. I mean, the Bible says demons believe in God, but they're separated from him. Of course, you can't have a relationship with him unless you first believe in him. But you can still have doubts and have a relationship with someone. So it's not about 100% plausibility or 100% assurance. It's about stepping out in faith. And faith is not believing in something in spite of the evidence. That's not the biblical definition of faith. Biblical definition of faith is trusting in what you have good evidence to believe in. That's biblical faith. And so you have good evidence. Do you have 100% certainty? No, but you have enough evidence. All you need is 51% to act on that and reach out, and God then begins a relationship with you and begins to transform you and begins to grow your confidence and grow your knowledge in your experience of him. So yes, your life rises and falls on your interaction with God, and he is constantly speaking to you, constantly drawing you, constantly seeking to reveal himself to you as far as you are willing to receive. So we can harden our hearts, we can resist, we can suppress the truth, But if we're willing for sincere seekers, I guarantee you that you will be led into an experience of him that will transform you. That is an excellent question. How do we know it's not Allah? How do we know it's not Hinduism? How do we know it's the Christian God? That is an excellent question. It's a fair question, and that is next week. If you come next week, you'll go home with the answer to that question. So you've gone back to moral epistemology. How different cultures have different understandings of things, but if there is no God and there's no moral ontology, then a culture that has baby sacrifices, we can't say that they're wrong, and we can't say that they are repressive or regressive. We can't say we have progressed. If like people will say, well, over the centuries, we have changed and we've advanced in our moral compass. But the only way you can advance is if you're heading towards a goal, if you're heading towards an ultimate right or good. And the only way you can have an ultimate right or good is if you have an ultimate lawgiver, an ultimate law. So if you think that society back in the medieval times or the Dark Ages was terrible and now we're much better, then you just acknowledge that there is an ultimate right or wrong. And if you're saying, well, yeah, but back then when the church was in charge, things were worse, but now we're better. If you think things are better now, then you just acknowledge your moral intuition is that there is an ultimate right or wrong, which can only be true if there is a God. So in your attempt to disprove God, you disproved him. So again, let's understand the difference between epistemology and ontology. Some cultures have gotten it wrong. They've gotten fuzzy. They've lost the plot. But even in those cultures, for the most part, can you think of a culture where it's good to betray someone who helped you? I mean, there's some basic intuition that all cultures transcend. So what different cultures do, that's epistemology, how we come to know the truth. And sometimes we miss it. But the reality is there is a truth that we seek to know. Next question. Yes, we can harden our hearts, we can cloud our hearts, we can reject God's movement and revelation in our lives. We can do that. We can go from a believer to a non-believer. Or we can resist. We can ultimately reject if we want. And we'll be held accountable for the evidence that we were given and the experiences that we had. So again, it comes back to what we talked about earlier. We are moral free agents, and we're not robots, we're not automatons, and God respects our decisions, which we're going to circle back to in a few weeks when we talk about hell. Why would a loving God create a hell? And you're going to discover that actually hell is, well, I'm not going to spoil it for you. Come that week. You might be shocked at the answer. Questions over here? Again, this is where it's a delicate. Can a person... I have met people and spoken with people who said they were a believer, they were a follower of Christ, and now they claim to be an atheist. I've met people who've transitioned that way. And I've met, of course, many who've come the other way. So they're accountable for their decisions and their beliefs. Belief is a psychological state, if you think about it. And so their psychological state has changed from trusting in God, and for whatever reasons they have, maybe a lot of it is topics we're going to be discussing in Skeptic. Something happened to their family. Their child was sick, or their spouse suffered, or they themselves have gone through trauma, and they've asked God, how can you exist if you've allowed this to happen? And so they feel they have reasons to reject God. Truth is, a lot of people that I've met over the years who say they no longer believe in God. When you dig down and chat with them for a couple hours, they're really just mad at God. But that's not always the case. But generally speaking, I think that's more the case than not. Yes, on this side. Yeah. It's the classic, the hiddenness of God, if you will. That's sort of the argument, that's the question that's often been asked. And what's called is an epistemic distance. God has an epistemic distance from us. What does that mean? That means that he is close enough to us that we can see him if we want to, but he's far enough away that we can resist him if we want. So God is part of his respecting our free will. He doesn't overwhelm us. He doesn't force himself upon us. He is at the perfect epistemic distance. Epistemic meaning, able to know or to have knowledge. And so he's placed us in, it's like the sun is just at the perfect place for humanity in the earth right now. It can warm us. It can burn you as well, but it's depending on your exposure to it, we're at the perfect spot in our galaxy. And in the same way, God has an epistemic distance that's perfect. So he doesn't force you, he doesn't overwhelm you, but he gives you enough information that you can make a decision. You have enough light to see where you're going. It's not so bright that you're blinded, and it's not completely dark that you're just feeling your way around. There's enough to see if you want. But if you don't want to see, it's not blinding you. And so again, God's goal is to have a relationship with you, not just for you to know that he exists. He's given you enough knowledge, us enough knowledge to know he exists. And now we have to act on that, and then that's where the relationship grows and expands. Great question. How can God be in control of the universe and us have a free will at the same time? And I think one of the best explanations I've heard of this, I think it was C.S. Lewis, who talked about, and I'll paraphrase what he said, but think of humanity is like a ship that's from New York to Liverpool, okay? And you're going across the Atlantic, and that ship has a predetermined route that it's taking, a predetermined destination. But the people on that ship are free to move around and make their choices if they want to. And in a similar way, history has a predetermined end to it. God is sovereign. He is directing history. He knows, because he's all-knowing, he knows how it's going to end. But at the same time, he gives us free will within that journey. Well, how can that be? Well, I am a proponent of something called Molinism, which is a theory of God's knowledge. It's also known as middle knowledge. And that is, God knows everything that will happen. God knows everything that could happen, but won't happen. But then middle knowledge is, God also knows what would happen, but won't happen. Meaning, if you were born as a man in the 5th century in Arabia, he knows what you would do in every situation. If I was born as a Muslim woman in the 900s, he knows what I would do in every choice I would make. He knows every possible contingency, everything that I would do, but I won't actually do. That's how incredible his knowledge is. So he places us in situations that he knows what we will freely do in every situation. I have a complete free will, and he's completely sovereign because he knows ahead of time what I will do. And foreknowledge isn't causation, meaning I know, in my limited knowledge, that at 8 o'clock in 10 minutes, you are going to leave. Does that mean I'm causing you to leave? No. Foreknowledge is not causation. Because I know what is going to happen in 10 minutes, in my limited knowledge, doesn't mean I'm causing it to happen. So God, the fact that he knows what will happen in the future doesn't mean he's causing it. He knows what you will freely choose. And he has so arranged the world that he has factored in the choices of everyone to direct history. Okay? using people who did not follow God's design and God's nature as evidence against God's existence is kind of irrational. The dots don't connect. It's like, so you don't use someone who rejected God's word as evidence that God doesn't exist. That's like saying, using someone who didn't follow the laws of our nation as proof that our nation is terrible. No, wait. We have laws, and the fact that someone rejected our laws is not proof that our nation's bad. It's proof that they rejected our nation. So it's kind of similar. What that proves is that they are hypocrites. It doesn't prove that God doesn't exist. It proves that they are hypocrites. Yeah, I think that would prove that there is no God. Or, yeah, because God, by definition, is the greatest conceivable being. And so, there's sometimes in atheist circles, they talk about, how do you know there's not an evil God? Well, an evil God is an oxymoron. An evil God is not God, because God is the greatest conceivable being, and evil is not a great-making quality. So, if there is no God, then there is no good. And by definition, there's no evil, because evil is the rejection of good. So if there are no ultimate moral values and objective moral values and duties, then that means there is no God, because he is the standard of goodness. So if there is no standard, there is no God. All I can say as a parent of 4 and a grandparent of 5 or 6 now, 5 with the 6 on the way. It's not as though I don't know the number. Thank you. I can say that love doesn't always control. Love does its best to influence, and love in the early stages seeks to put around boundaries as much as you can, but there comes a point when love has to stand back and let people make decisions. And so God does all that he can to teach us, to woo us, to draw us, to protect us, but love requires the ability to choose, and love requires us to experience the consequences of our choices. So I'm sure there are many times God protects us from our consequences, but at the same time, ultimately, he doesn't force himself upon us. He doesn't force his will upon us. And if he did, then we would all be saying, if you're so powerful, why don't you let us make up our own decisions? Like, we try to have it both ways. So love, yes, does everything it can to influence, protect, and correct, and direct, but at the same time, there's a tension that love manages where there are times that love says, I will not force myself upon you. Love is a choice, the decision, reciprocal on both sides. And those numbers that I gave, I've gotten them from various textbooks. All you would need to do is Google cosmological constant, gravitational constant, and things like that, and they're out there. Okay, and if you find that mine are way off, tell me next week. But there won't be. Okay. Yes, Liv. So there is no origin of God. God has no beginning. He has no end. He is an eternal being. And he is what's known as a necessary being. In philosophy, they talk about contingent beings and necessary beings. He is a necessary being. And the one thing about a necessary being that's necessary is that they exist. So existence is part of his necessity. It's impossible for a necessary being to not exist. And so a contingent universe, contingent creation requires an uncaused cause. And that's what God is. He's the uncaused cause, the eternal being, a being that has always existed, that does not change in his nature and in his being, and from whom everything springs and has sprung, whatever the proper word is. And so that is his nature, and that is how he revealed himself. And with that odd grammatical statement, I am. Not I was or I will be, I am. I exist. I am a necessary being. I simply exist. And that's how he has revealed himself. And Scripture, he refers to himself as the eternal God as well. The Alpha and the Omega, the Bible says, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. The everlasting God is how he's revealed himself to us. All right, we promised you it would be done at 8 o'clock. One more question. It's 2 minutes to 8. If there's one more, otherwise Lewis is just chomping at the bit. Okay, we have one back there. Good. You can't lose your salvation. Salvation is something like, where did I put it? My salvation. You don't lose it. But it's something that you can have a relationship with God, and it's like a marriage. You can cut off that relationship, and you can reject that. You can divorce God, and for whatever reason that you have, and you will be held accountable for your decision. So yes, it is possible to go from the state of being a follower of Christ to being someone who is no longer a follower of Christ, to go from someone who is in relationship with God to someone who is no longer in relationship with God. It's absolutely possible to do that. In fact, Jesus talked about examples of that in Scripture. So yes, and so did the Apostle Paul in the New Testament. It's very possible. Yeah. Well, thank you, folks. Next week, we are going to follow up and talk about what is the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. How do we know Jesus rose from the dead? Is that just something you have to believe randomly by faith? You might be shocked at what you're going to learn because it's going to impact every other religion in the world. Lewis, follow up with our conclusion here.
Thank you. Before you go, a couple things. First of all, can we give a round of applause for Pastor Darren? Thank you so much.